Aaron Zera tells a fable. I think it's a really good setup for this series. There was a poor man who lived with his wife and 6 children in a very small one-room house. They were always getting in each other's way. There was so little space they could hardly breathe. Finally, the man could stand it no more. He talked to his wife and asked her what to do. "Go see the rabbi," she told him. After arguing a while about it, he went. And so the poor man told the rabbi how miserable things were, how they were getting at home with his wife and all 6 of his children all eating and living and sleeping in one room. The poor man told the rabbi, "We're even starting to yell and fight. Life couldn't be worse." The rabbi thought very deeply about the poor man's predicament. Then he said, "Do exactly as I tell you, and then things will get better. Do you promise?" The poor man promised him that he would. The rabbi then asked the poor man a strange question. He said, "Do you own any animals?" "Yes," he said. "I have 1 cow, 1 goat, some chickens." "Good," the rabbi said. "When you get home, take all the animals into the house to live in your house with you." The poor man was astonished to hear this advice, but he had promised to do exactly what the rabbi instructed him to do. So he went home and he took all the farm animals and he brought them in the tiny one-room house with his 6 children and wife. The next day, the poor man ran back to see the rabbi. "What have you done to me? It's awful. I did what you told me, and the animals are all over the house. Rabbi, help me." The rabbi listened and said calmly, "Okay, now go home and take the chickens back outside." The poor man did as the rabbi said, but he hurried back again the next day. "The chickens are gone, but Rabbi, the goat," he moaned. "The goat is smashing up all the furniture and eating everything in sight." The good rabbi said, Well, go home and remove the goat, and may God bless you." So the poor man went home and took the goat outside, but then he ran back to see the rabbi again the next day. He said, "Rabbi, with this cow, it's like living in a stable. Can human beings live with an animal like a cow?" The rabbi said sweetly, "My friend, you're right. May God bless you. Go home now and take the cow out of your house." And the poor man went quickly home and took the cow out of his house. The next day, he came running back to the rabbi again. "Oh, Rabbi," with a big smile on his face, "we have such a good life now. The animals are all out of the house. The house is so quiet, and we've got room to spare. What a joy." What was the rabbi teaching this poor man and everyone living with him? He was teaching him that a change in perspective is important. A change in perspective actually produced a change in gratitude. Did you notice that? Did you notice that the only thing that the poor man in this fable received was a new perspective? He didn't get a new house. He didn't get a new spouse. Same kids, same financial standing. The only thing he gained, which was so worth it, was perspective. When he had perspective, he had gratitude. See, complaining results when we lose something very valuable, when we lose perspective. When we forget where we are and what we have. Sometimes we forget where we were, and it's impacting the way we're seeing things right now. Sometimes we lose perspective. We lose the sight of what great blessings we actually have. Now, I'll be the first to admit, it's hard not to complain. It's hard. I mean, you can think of one of the Psalms says, "Today is the day the Lord has made. Rejoice and be glad in it." And that lasts all but until you check your weather app and you go, "Oh, it's going to be cloudy, rainy." We complain almost right away, And then maybe you start thinking about your to-do list on a typical, basis, and you go, "I got to do this today. Oh, I wish I could do something else." Can it be a different day? And then, so that's how your day starts, typically. My day starts typically. And then maybe sometime you venture online. It's essentially complaint media, That's all it is. It's like everything is a complaint about something and somebody else. And and all of this. Or maybe you're looking at it and then you start to complain because of something you see. And then you finally end up at work or school, which isn't that a toxic place for complaining, right? I mean, some of us, our cultures at work or wherever it is, I mean, it's like complain after complain after complain after complain. It's hard not to complain. It's easy to lose perspective. I mean, what do you find yourself on the average complaining about? Whether it's small or big, whether it's as small as the weather or as big as the circumstances you're in or the person you're married to or their tendencies. On average, people complain 15 to 20 times a day. That's once every hour you're awake. You're complaining about something. I'm complaining about something. See, losing perspective is dangerous. It's so dangerous, which is why when my kids look at me and they go, I don't like this food, I'm like, hold on, get some perspective, You're eating, be thankful, but it's like, I've got to teach them this, because if they grow up without perspective, then it's dangerous. Well, just how dangerous is not having correct perspective? Well, I'm just going to tell you. That's why we're doing this series. It's one of the ungratefulness is one of the most dangerous things you can let into your heart. Because complaining, active ungratefulness, complaining costs you progress and it provides you with pain. You don't gain anything by it. It actually hurts you. And the thing is, it's not something out there that's happening to you. It's something in here that's battling. It's an enemy. It's an enemy sometimes in our soul and in our heart when we see the things around us, the things we don't have, the things we think we should have, the hardships we're facing. There's something in us that wants to, complain or to be ungrateful. And I'm telling you right now, one of your greatest enemies to the progress and the life that you want, the life following Jesus that you want, is the simple act of complaining. Now, the Israelites, lost perspective after these incredible things that God did for them in the Old Testament. If you remember the story of Exodus, maybe you've never heard the story of Exodus, what that book is about is the second book of the Bible. It's about a great exodus. And see, the people of Israel, they were in slavery, and they were in slavery for 4 centuries, and it was harsh slavery. They were forced to do labor, day in, day out, 7 days a week, and for decades they were crying out. They were sort of complaining to God, this is unjust. Would you free us? Would you save us? Would you send someone? Then finally God picks the perfect person, Moses, who was raised as an Egyptian, but then he flees and he spends 40 years sort of preparing for this. God shows up in a burning bush and he says, Moses, go let my people go. And so Moses finally agrees, and then he goes into Pharaoh, and then God performs all these signs and miracles to try to convince the king of Egypt to let these, this free labor force go. He finally does, and then he changes his mind. But by this time, over 600,000, up to 2 million people are on the run. They're fleeing. They're making a great exit from slavery, from Egypt, from a terrible situation. Then they get to the banks of the Red Sea, and then God does maybe the most amazing thing in the whole story is he parts the Red Sea. They all cross on dry land, and it closes up just in time to stop the enemies that were pursuing them from getting them. And then they're on the other side of the sea. God protected them from the Egyptians, and then he leads them to a mountain. And then Moses ascends the mountain, and they see God visibly descend on the mountain. And while Moses is up there for 40 days, God is giving him the 10 commandments. Moses comes back down the mountain. There's a little bit of stuff that goes on. He has to go back up and get it again because they committed idolatry in the process. All throughout this time frame, from the time they crossed the Red Sea, they received the 10 commandments. It's been 4 years before we hit our text today in Numbers chapter 11. It's been 4 years since they crossed the Red Sea. It's been maybe 2-3 years since they saw the 10 commandments. And by the way, God is every day providing them with manna, which is like a food that he specially created for them so they could have sustenance while they were in the desert, while they were in the wilderness. Every day he would provide a way to guide them. A pillar of fire would show them where to go, and it would show them when to stop. They had all kinds of interaction with God. And then on top of that, God makes a promise to them. He says, I'm going to take you out of that slavery land, Egypt, and eventually on this journey, we're going to get to the promised land, a place of rest, a place of peace, a place that you'll be most thankful to be at. And so they're at a place right now where it's been 4 years since they crossed the Red Sea, and they're kind of the book Numbers is called Numbers because they're counting. They're counting the armies. They're going to need an army. They're trying to figure out how many people do we have in the army so we can make this conquest. And they're consecrating themselves. They're preparing themselves spiritually for this trip. When a different enemy surfaces, not the one they left behind and not the ones they were going to encounter, an enemy from within. Numbers chapter 11, verse 1. Now the people complained about their hardships in the hearing of the Lord. And when he heard them, his anger was aroused, or kindled would be the literal way to hear that. Then fire from the Lord burned among them and consumed some of the outskirts of the camp. So very literally, there was some kind of manifestation on the outskirts of the camp that got people's attention. No harm here other than to, some provisions, maybe some tents, who knows. When the people cried out to Moses, he prayed to the Lord and the fire died down. So that place was called Taberah because fire from the Lord burned among them. The rabble with them, it's an interesting way to denote a group of people. The rabble began to crave other food. And again, the Israelites started wailing and said, if only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost. Also the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now we've lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna. The manna was like coriander seed and looked like resin. The people went around gathering it and then ground it in a hand mill or crushed it in a mortar. They cooked it in a pot or made it into loaves and it tasted like something made with olive oil. When the dew settled on the camp at night, the manna also came down. And you could only use what was provided for a day. And God every day would do this miracle for these people. And they're complaining. They're complaining about this food. Which first of all, they have options here. They made it in different ways. It was everything they needed to survive. And it was made, it says olive oil, but that was a fine oil. And it said it tasted something like made with oil, like really it was a cake. And so essentially God was like a heavenly Panera bread right there every day. Why are they complaining? It's a heavenly pastry. Here we go. Verse 10 through 15, Moses responds. Moses heard the people of every family wailing. Remember I said there's 600,000 men? Every family. At the entrance of their tents. The Lord became exceedingly angry. It's a little bit more than he was a few verses ago. And Moses was troubled. He asked the Lord, why have you brought this trouble on your servant? You're going to love Moses here. What have I done to displease you? That you put the burden of these people on me? Did I conceive all these people, God? Did I give them birth? Why do you tell me to carry them in my arms as a nurse carries an infant to the land you promised on oath to their ancestors? Where can I get meat for all these people? They keep wailing to me. Give us meat to eat. I cannot carry all these people by myself. The burden is too heavy for me. If this is how you are going to treat me, please go ahead and kill me. If I have found favor in your eyes, and do not let me face my own ruin. Moses is keeping it real. He's saying this is terrible. See, and then in the next couple of verses, God reminds Moses of his power, and he informs him of his decision. So we have the Israelites and the rabble with them complaining, and then Moses goes to God and complains to God, and then God makes a decision. Here's the decision. We're going to skip down to verse 18. He says, tell the people, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow, when you will eat meat. The Lord heard you when you wailed. I don't think this is going to go in a good place. I'm just saying. If only we had meat to eat, we were better off in Egypt. Now the Lord will give you meat, and you will eat it. You will not eat it just for 1 day, or 2 days, or 5, 10, or 20 days, but for a whole month, until it comes out of your nostrils. Sometimes the Bible is humorous. And you loathe it, because you have rejected the Lord who is among you, and have wailed before him, saying, why did we ever leave Egypt? You think we're still talking about food? You think God's got something else going on here? This is more than a food problem, I think. We'll wrap up this section in verse 31 through 35. Now a wind went out from the Lord and drove quail in from the sea. It scattered them up to 2 cubits. That's 3 feet deep. Okay, imagine that. 3 feet of quail. 3 feet deep, all around the camp, as far as a day's walk in any direction. That's a lot of quail. No one gathered less than 10 homers, 1.6 metric tons. Then they spread them out all around the camp. But while the meat was still between their teeth, and before it could be consumed, the anger of the Lord burned against his people, and he struck them with severe plague. Therefore, the place was named Kibroth Hattaavah, because there they buried the people who craved other food. From Kibroth Hattaavah, the people traveled to Hazeroth and stayed there. What do we learn? God takes complaining seriously because he cares deeply. And this seems a little harsh the way this ends, doesn't it? You kind of go, ooh, that's all they did was complain? We're going to find out how serious what they did was, and how serious complaining is, and how complaining can actually lead you there and lead me there if it goes to a certain level. The reason why God takes complaining so seriously is because he cares about you and me very deeply. Because complaining, do you remember what I said? Complaining costs you progress, and it provides you with pain. And God doesn't want you to not have progress, and he doesn't want you to experience pain. God loves us so much, he will stop anything that threatens to stop our progress and give us a deeper pain. And sometimes that means we experience pain to revert us back on course. See, the Israelites grew ungrateful, and it cost them dearly. And you would think they would get the picture after this. And they don't. Because as Numbers keeps unfolding, next they're complaining about Moses, their leader, and how he's not qualified, and how he married someone who was not a Hebrew, and that's a problem. He shouldn't be their leader. Then they start to complain about the plan that God gives them, that they can't take this land because the people are too mighty they're about to go after. And then they complain they don't have water, and they want water, and on and on and on and on. And then finally God has enough, and he says, you know what, because of your complaining, this 4 years that it's been since, this amazing miracle of crossing the Red Sea, well, it's going to turn into 40 years. And most of you aren't going to experience the promised land. You're not going to taste progress because of your ungratefulness. I wonder how many of us are not tasting progress, but rather we're tasting pain, because very similarly, we complain. So how do we stop complaining? Identify complaining before it gets so bad that it contaminates us, and it causes us pain, and it costs us progress. I mean, if it's true, in Ephesians 1:3, it says that you and I have been blessed with every spiritual blessing in Christ. If that's true, why are we not more grateful? There's an enemy living inside of you. And it's not Satan, it's you. It's a spirit of ungratefulness. It's a spirit of forgetting. It's a spirit of questioning God. And in order for you to have progress, in order for you to not experience pain on the other side of complain, we are going to need to do battle with that enemy inside of us. And so I want to give us 3 strategic questions so we can be equipped to fight the enemy of complaining. We're going to answer the question, what is it, and why do we do it? Why is it such a big deal, and how can we stop? The first one, what is it? What is complaining, and why do we do it? So it's kind of 2. Well, Sun Tzu, who is a Chinese military strategist, has a famous quote. It says, know thy enemy and know thyself. If you know your enemy and you know yourself, in 100 battles, you'll never be defeated. So half the battle is knowing yourself, and the other half is knowing what you're up against. Let me give you a definition for complaining. Complaining is expressing levels of distrust that what one has or does not have is satisfactory. It's expressing levels of distrust. It's not just a little sidebar. It's literally an expression of distrust. Now, I want us to think for a second about the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve were. We're supposed to learn so much from those early couple of chapters of Genesis because it really sets the stage for the rest of the narrative of the Bible. Do you remember that God said, you can have anything you want here? Remember, it was paradise. It was perfect. We all wish we were there right now. He said, the only thing you can't do is eat from this one tree, because if you eat from this one tree, it'll ruin everything. And of course, we see, the snake, the serpent, Satan, on the scene, and he starts to get in, questioning Eve to question, God's holding out on you here. Did God really say? And then Eve says, yeah, he really said. And then she says, and we must not even touch it, which God never said, but it kind of sounds like a complaint, doesn't it? We can't touch this tree. He just put this here and, we can't eat it. Yeah, we heard that. And we can't even touch it. And then, of course, she takes the fruit and gives it to her husband. And after they sin, Adam, what does he do? He complains about Eve. This woman, she's the reason. And then Eve complains about Satan. He put the thought in my head and he tricked me. And then God is sitting there picking up the pieces going, what did you do? Why did you crave to do what I told you not to do? Why did you not believe? Why did you not trust that this would turn out badly if you went against what I said? And weren't content with the provisions I've given you, which, by the way, they had so much. I just want to ask, did an attitude of ingratitude for what God had made and provided, this perfect garden and these perfect provisions, did something with gratitude contaminate the human heart in that process for the first sin? Maybe there was a whole lot more going on with the story in Numbers and the Garden of Eden and when you and I complain. Because sometimes when we complain, it's a rejection saying that we need something else other than what you've provided, God. We don't trust your provision. We need something different to bring us peace and happiness and contentment and harmony and joy and pleasure. Think about this. So if the enemy can get you and me to get a little ungrateful, then he can sort of trick us through our own will to stop our own progress and to provide ourselves with pain. He doesn't have to do anything but make a suggestion and we fall for it. Now, did you notice in this story in Numbers that the people progressed through 3 different levels of complaining? It seemed to start kind of basic and it seemed to kind of gradually grow. And in fact, in the text that we read, there's 3 different Hebrew words for complaining that we translate differently, and I'm going to give them to you. So level 1, okay, this is when complaining starts. The word that we read was in verse 1 of chapter 11, and it was the word complained. And what is this? This is, a better translation would be murmuring. And this is the idea of like, it said that they were privately kind of dissatisfied. Maybe they were complaining to their close friend or in their own house. It wasn't public yet, but nevertheless, it was in the hearing of the Lord. They thought they were just kind of murmuring and God wasn't hearing, but apparently he heard. And then it moves to level 2, which it said they were crying out. They were unhappy with their provisions, right? And So this word is kind of like an organized complaining. So there was a protest beginning is what was happening. It's not just one person privately, oh, this is bad, I don't like this. Now you have a collection of people coming together, and it's actually a gathering to revolt is the best way to translate. They are linking arms and unifying, going, this is terrible. That's the kind of complaining that's going on here. And then eventually it gets to level 3, which is wailing, verse 4 of chapter 11. And this word is like, carries a humility. Not in a good sense. Like they were grieving that God was their God because he wasn't doing what they needed. And it was almost more like a contemptuous anger. They had this anger towards God for what he had did and what he was doing and what he was not doing. Do you see how complaining can progress? Where are you at on this spectrum? And how do you know? Well, the first thing is we complain, and they did in this case, in verse 1, the cause of level 1 complaining is hardships. Hardships. Something hard's happening, and they complain. We all experience that, right? We've all experienced hardships. Maybe the marriage is going through a rocky patch, or maybe parenting's hard right now. Maybe you're dealing with some money issues. You feel stuck in some way. That's a hardship. And so oftentimes we want to complain about those things. And not that that's completely bad. It's just it can be bad, especially if it finds fertile soil and it grows on itself and becomes something you don't want it to be. Because to get to level 2 from level 1, you shift from complaining about your hardship, this is really hard, you start to complain about the provisions in the hardship. Did you notice that? They started complaining about what God was providing. It wasn't enough. How does it go from 1 to 2? How does that shift happen? Well, the text tells us the rabble. Do you remember the rabble, the people? This is very important because in Exodus 12:38, it says, right before they crossed the Red Sea, it says, many other people went up with them. So these are non-Hebrews, probably Egyptians who saw all the amazing things God did and were like, we want to follow that God. That's pretty cool. I want to, can we go with you? And they let them, and here they are. And so now you have these natives to Egypt who were part of this toxic ungratefulness. How many of you know that your complaining will always grow if you are in like company? I mean, what was happening here was they were starting to build a consensus with unhealthy, similar spirited people, and it made things worse. And that's the same thing that will happen for you and me. You're going through something hard. You're starting to go, why did you give this to me, God? You get around somebody else who's super negative, and that's not going to help at all. In fact, it's going to make it worse. It's going to stall your progress. It's going to cause more pain. And so maybe one quick takeaway is you need to limit or eliminate some people in your life. And then maybe add some others, Do you have people in your life who share the same life vision, the same life values as you? You need some. Maybe there's somebody that you can't really separate from, but you need to figure out a loving way to confront the way they're negative. So they're complaining about the manna, which the word manna literally means, it's actually a question, what is it? Because no one ever seen it. And manna has gone to be this huge symbol in the Bible to represent the great and timely and necessary provision for whatever need we have. And here's all the people. What are they doing? They're looking at what God has provided, and they're going, oh, if we only had. And then they go, hey, remember when we had? And then they say, we never see anything. But this is an ungrateful, highly developed level of complaining. And ungratefulness, really all ungratefulness is complaining about the Lord and what he provides. Complain about the weather, you're complaining to God. Could have made a better day. Why didn't you make it better today? Every complaint, whether it's directly to God, is indirectly about God. And it expresses a distrust. And if we're not careful, it can turn into level 3 complaining, where we're almost embarrassed that he's our God. We're contemptuous. We're angry at God. In level 3, we shift from complaining about the provision, I don't like what I have, to the provider. And what takes you there? It's a form of idolatry. It's saying, I want something other than you in the place of my provider. Because you're not cutting it, God. It's not the provision, it's the one making the provision. And if I just find something else to provide me with pleasure and joy and peace and contentment and all those things, that's what I need. A person in level 3 has a deeper appetite for something other than the real God. We all experience hardships, but it becomes dangerous when we progress to this level, because we starting to complain now, not about what we have and don't have, but about who is ultimately responsible. What does this look like? Let me give you some practical examples. Maybe for you, before you got married, you complained to God and said, God, it's so hard for me to be single. I just really need someone in my life, someone who gets me, and we can, do life together and raise a family. And so you asked God for a spouse, and then guess what? God provided. But now, your prayers are kind of like, he or she, maybe you're not even praying, you're just thinking this. He or she is not delivering for me. It was cool for a few years, things have changed, and then we are actually in our spirit asking, how about a new spouse? The one you gave me is not that good. God, I really needed a job. I would need to be able to put food on my table, have some meaning in life. And you provided me a job, and it's not my dream job necessarily, and it was good for a while, and I was thankful for a while, but now the people I work with, oh my goodness, and my boss, are you for real, God? And I'm just getting so sick of this task or this challenge at work. How about a new job? How about a new boss? How about some new teammates? Can't stand her. Or maybe you lead a company or you're a boss. How about some new employees? These ones aren't so good. God, you were doing so great managing my life when I gave it to you 5 or 10 years ago, 20 years ago, but I haven't seen you come through in a while. How about you show up in this circumstance the way I want you to? You see, when you shift from complaining about what you don't have or what you don't have enough of to the person who's providing it, it's a very serious level of complaining. And everybody that's complaining on a base level is at risk for it growing into this level, and you don't want it to grow into this level. Because your complaining is essentially saying, on this level, God, you're not enough. You're not enough for me to live. You're the one causing me pain. You're the one that's not giving me happiness. So I need, I don't need you. What I need is this kind of spouse. What I need is this kind of romance. What I need is this kind of approval. What I need is this outcome or this health situation or this amount of money or this job. And don't even get me started on the weather I need today. In level 3, we see 2 other enemies, which we'll talk about in the next couple of weeks surface. We see comparison, where they're thinking about Egypt and what they had. And we see this thing in us that craves and longs to have better, different, and more. And we'll talk about those over the next couple of weeks. But essentially in verse 6, do you remember the part where they say, we've lost our appetite? Do you remember that? This is such a serious thing, they said to God, because literally what they're saying is we've lost our breath, which is the same word that's used when it says God breathed life into us when he created. And they're essentially saying, God, you failed us. You're inadequate at being God, at breathing life into us. You're not working. We're pretty mad about this. And you're so mad, at least they were, that they started rejecting God. Because all they could think about is what their life is missing and what God's not doing. And they keep thinking, well, that will fill it, or if I have that, then I'll be happy. You've taken us this far, God, but now we might need a different God to get us to a different kind of promised land. See, what happened was they lost perspective. on who God is and how much he cares and how powerful he is. And it's so serious. And it all started with some murmuring and some complaining. Why is it so serious? Because complaining hurts you deeply. Complaining hurts you deeply. It hurts you on a physiological level. Did you know that there's been studies done that shows that someone who regularly complains, their brain stops developing correctly? It actually shrinks. The part of your brain that's responsible for memory creation and retention gets smaller when you're a chronic complainer. Did you know people who chronically complain have an inability, according to a study, that to be able to see solutions? So they're kind of black and white thinkers. So if it doesn't go all one way, they react all another way. There's no ability for them to think in the middle. It also impacts us spiritually. You can't have intimacy with God, with another person even, if you are in a complaining spirit. If you're only thinking about what they're not doing for you, how they're not measuring up the way you need them to. See, it's no wonder why they doubt and reject and want something other than God, because all they can think about is what God's not doing for them. And it's, if you take that another level, let's talk about marriage for a second. It's no wonder you don't have feelings like you used to. It's because all you're thinking about is what he or she's not doing. You're never going to have that intimacy and that affection until you remove the ungratefulness. It won't happen. Practically, it hurts you because you're always going to be chasing something else to fill you, and you'll make something else a God instead of what God and God himself, because you're sick of what he's providing. And so you'll reason to yourself, you need something different. I need this, or I need a different spouse, or I need a different job. And you'll keep trying all these things to make you fulfilled and happy and at peace, and none of them will work. The real danger here is that when real hardship comes, if you're really making something else your God, a provision that you want, the real danger is that when you lose it or can't have it, you're so broken and hurt because you've put your trust in it on the level that you should be trusting God. It hurts you mentally. A spirit of gratitude is a part of our journey through ambiguity. There's a lot of times we don't have the answers in life, right? A spirit of gratitude helps you through that. A spirit of gratitude helps you through anxiety when you're not sure or you're worried. Rightly practiced gratitude has the power to give you peace and to guard your mind. Let me read you a text. You know this text, likely. If not, this will be a first time hearing it. And this is one of my favorite texts to think about. Philippians 4:4-7 says, "Rejoice in the Lord always." Not when you feel like it. I will say it again. He has to tell us twice because Paul knows. Rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, notice this part, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. You can, pray all you want, ask God to do all you want, but if you never do it with thanksgiving, are you going to have access to this peace that transcends all understanding? See, we need to remember who God is. We need to remember what he's done, especially when we're facing hardships or we're questioning the difficulties in our life. It's why God commands memorials and regular gatherings and meals and festivals. Why? Because we forget. We forget how powerful and how good and how wise of a decision it was to trust him. We get in the middle of another hardship and we start murmuring and complaining and crying out. And within the story, think about it. A couple of times you saw it, they named places where they made mistakes. Did you notice that? Why did they do this? So they could never forget they made these mistakes. What is their way of saying, let's never go back there. Let's never do that again. That was a bad decision on our part. And we do this. You do this with your life. You'll look back on a time in your life and you'll go, well, that was my addiction season. I'm never going back there. Or you look back in a time in your life and you go, well, that was the season that I thought sex and experiencing sex, well, that was it. And you're like, I'm never going back there. Or you'll look back at your life and you go, that was the time when I was so consumed with work and success and I chased it. And I'm not going back there because of the person that made me, the way it detached me from my family. I remember the time in my life where I chased something other than God to be my progress, and I experienced great pain. We can all look back and remember when we've done that, and it's very, very important that we remember. Listen, God cares so much about your progress. And when the Israelites, when their complaining levels up, did you notice that God's anger leveled up too? The louder they got, the more serious their ungratefulness got, the more angry God became. Why? Not because God is selfish, but because God knows it will hurt us deeply. It will take us to places of idolatry. It will take us to places of pain. And so he has to remove it. He has to maybe introduce some pain into our life so he gets our attention back. How do we stop it? It's so serious. How do we stop it? It's quite simple. Bring your pains to God and trust him to provide. See, there is a healthy way to complain, and Moses modeled it for us. And I like Moses there because, first of all, what does he do? He asks for help. He tells God, this is honestly what I'm frustrated about, God. He doesn't have to fake it. He doesn't have to pretend, oh, God, you're so great, and blah, blah, blah. He says, no, this is my hardship, God. Do something about this. He's honest about how hard these people are and how he feels under-equipped for the task. That's how you complain. How do you complain? To God. Not to her, not to him, not to your mom. You complain to God. You got a problem with your spouse? Complain to God about it. Complaining to somebody else isn't going to help. You got a problem with something? Is parenting hard? You know, it's hard. Is working with them hard? Is fighting this desire in your heart hard? What do? You take it to God, like Moses did, and you just be so honest with him. And then you be humble. Don't just be honest, be humble. Say, God, I can't do this. This is too hard. Remember he said, I didn't conceive these people. How am I going to take care of them? You take care of them. That's a humble statement. Did you know that? Why? Because he's essentially saying, I'm not God, you are. You be God, I'll be man. How about that? That's humility. That's saying, I can't do this. I need you to be God. That's the opposite of what the people were saying when they were saying, we need to get rid of this God. And God is saying, how about you be God more now? Here we go. And then finally, change your perspective. See, Moses experiences God telling him in the following verses his power and what he can do, that he's able, that he cares, that he knows. There is a way to complain, and you complain to God with thanksgiving. If you change your perspective, you can experience progress. How can you change your perspective? Really? Because isn't that what makes us complain? You can combat complaining with active, kinds of gratitude. I'm going to give you a few examples to try. The first thing you can do is remember what God has given you. And maybe the easiest way you can do this is after you're done here today, you can just kind of allot some time and just open up your phone or a photo album and just look back over some memories. You'll start to feel gratitude. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Do that. Maybe for you, you need to pray. And you don't need to go to God and say, do this, do this, do this, do this only. Maybe for the next 7 days, you only pray prayers of thanksgiving. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for, Like, what if you just had prayers with thanksgiving only? What would that do to you? Maybe what you need to do is you need to feed on the word, not on the world. There was a study done by the Center for Bible Engagement, and they found something interesting. I've shared this before, but it's so important. We can never forget this. People who read their Bible once a week experience almost zero change in their life. Twice a week, still very minimal. 3 times a week, not too much. But once people cross the threshold of engaging their Bible on their own 4 times or more a week, there was amazing results in their life. it kind of makes sense because you're feeding, depending on the provider, not a provision to bring you peace and joy and sustenance. People who read their Bible, according to this study, 4 or more times a week were 228% time more likely to share their faith, 231% more likely to disciple others, 407% more likely to memorize scripture, and they were over 50% more likely not to get drunk, not to have premarital sex or sex outside of marriage, and not to look at porn. Doesn't that just make sense? When you're feeding on God, you're now able to combat the things that are saying, you need this, everyone's doing this is a good time. I know it's outside of the parameters of God, but when you put the word in you, it changes you. If you're married and you have a tough time right now being thankful for your spouse, I'm going to challenge you. I think you might have lost perspective of what they do for you and have done for you and consistently bring to the table. And so what you need to do is you need to maybe go find a piece of paper and you need to write. Do you remember a long time ago there was a movie, 10 Things I Hate About You? Don't do that. Okay, you did that already probably this morning, just keeping it real on the drive. Okay, so you need to sit down and go, what are the 10 things I love about him? What are the 10 things I love about her? And here's the real challenge. Don't keep it to yourself. Tell them. Don't be weird about it. Hey, here's my list, However, if that's all you do, for us guys, we love that. Hey, sweet, you're thinking about how great I was. I love it, If you eliminate complaining, what we learn from this text is you will experience progress. And you will be able to overcome a worse kind of pain, even if trusting God in the moment is painful. Jesus himself, think about it, experienced ultimate rejection and ridicule. And think about this. In the entire trial of Jesus, even while he was on the cross, he never complained. Not once did he utter a complaint. Even when the crowds, had to pick between Barabbas, which his other name was Jesus. Did you know that? When they had to pick between which Jesus, which God they wanted, they chose the criminal and chose to crucify Jesus. They chose to eliminate him. And even so, Jesus didn't complain. Jesus willingly took the penalty for our sin, our idolatry, our lack of trusting God for what he gives. And he gave himself as the ultimate provision. He paid the highest cost. See, you're only able to experience progress in this life. You're only able to deal with the real issue of ungratefulness in our heart, not because you try really hard to be grateful, but because God eliminated Jesus. He abandoned him. The full weight of God's anger for our complaining and our unsatisfaction with him and our seeking other gods, you know what it did? It cost Jesus his life. Imagine if your perspective changed. Imagine if you complained less. Imagine if you worshiped and you thanked more. What if you were living your life so dependent on the Word of God? What if daily you were remembering his provisions? What if you could recall what he's done in your past and that gives you hope as you go through the hardship right now? What if you were more grateful? What if you were closer to God? What if you saw his power? What if you trusted his process and let him provide you with the promised progress? Listen, God takes complaining so seriously because he loves you and cares about you so deeply. And he shows us that so clearly when he pours out the full weight of his wrath, not on you, not on me, on Jesus. And for that, that's the greatest provision. That's what we all need, a new heart, a new life, a transformation. Maybe you need transformation. Maybe you need a new God. Maybe Jesus isn't your God, and today you can make him your God. If that's you, please go back to the 103. The rest of us, we're going to sing a song, and I want you to let God turn your heart into a grateful heart. Would you stand? Let's sing.